course, now yeah, here we go. Let me maximize this window here just for good measure. Alrighty, so I think, Jeremy, this is yours.
Yep. So, I did some amount of work, in the last year, 2-year frame to try and improve performance in WinForms on drawing. Part of that was making some changes to system drawing internally. The other ones are, looking through the paint loops in particular for WinForms. And one of the things that shows up a ton is this get context info. We have to, because WinForms was originally totally system drawing in GDI Plus, and in 2.0 they tried to move as much as they could to GDI because GDI Plus has performance implications, and this thing was part of that, and it's a way to apply the translation transform and also the clipping that are layered on top of the underlying HTC in a graphics object. So when we want to work directly with the HTC, we get those pieces out and apply them temporarily to the HTC, do our GDI drawing, and then we're done with it. And system drawing does a little bit of this itself too. It calls this same API. As you see, it returns an object. That object is actually an array of a region and a matrix, and that's not great. We're allocating an array every time we try to paint anything. That shows up a ton, in any larger WinForm thing. So one aspect of this is just simply providing a way to get it out without, sticking them in an object array. The other thing is a change in behavior, and that's to track internally whether the clip or the transform are ever set by the end user, so that the complicated logic it has to do internally, and there's some allocations along that as well, that it can skip out on some of those things if we know that the thing is in a clean state, basically. So both of those things will cut out a lot of allocations for redraws in WinForms.
So I don't know whether I missed that, but I just noticed that in .NET Framework, at least, it seems that the get context info that already exists is marked as editor browsable never. Do you know why?
Because it's documented as internal use only. So that would be another change here as we document what this does, but it's conceivable that other people would want to do the same pattern. I mean, if we do it, why wouldn't they? So because there is no way currently in the API surface to get this thing that you can save state with a graphics object, and it builds a stack internally. This thing is able to walk that stack and build up the cumulative transform, the cumulative clip. You can't do that anywhere in the API. This is the only place you can get that aggregated clip and transform.
So the type that we return is the actual type or the base type actually public? So in other words, can people downcast this object to something meaningful?
Which the other object?
So the get context info one returns an object, right? I suppose that's some internal object that we use for bookkeeping, right? Can that downcast that to something?
Well, it's just an object array with a region and a matrix in it.
I see.
We've never documented it, but it's never changed. I mean, you could check it to see, of course, and see what's in it, but it is a public API. It's just, again, marked as this is.
Yeah, I guess that's my question, right? I mean, it seems like maybe the intent was that we want to change the instance that we return.
Yeah. So I would presume that's what they were trying to do, is kind of leave it sort of open-ended. There is really nothing else that you can apply. The one thing we might end up doing in the future, but I sort of doubt it, is actually returning the full transform instead of just the offset. But we're so baked into just doing just applying the offset that I doubt that we would ever do that. So that's probably the only thing we would ever do, is we might have a third, another overload where we'd add one more thing, because those two pieces. So the underlying thing is not that point F. That's an optimization. It's a matrix class, but we have ways to avoid creating that class internally, right? We can get the native object, get the stuff out of it, and then free it. The GDI plus thing to avoid creating a .NET thing around it, right? A .NET matrix.
So basically, the problem is
the current thing is returning a matrix and a region, and this one's returning a point in a region.
Because the matrix, the only thing we're returning in it is the actual offset pieces.
Okay.
So everything else in it is 0.
Okay.
Or identity. Even any place this thing is called, we just get those two. Well, that's all we put in it. And that's the only thing we ever get out. So it's possible we might want to return the other ones. I actually have another API proposal up about potentially taking a dependency on system numerics in here to allow us to pass data around without passing classes. Because it's very heavyweight, and I have another proposal that still needs to be checked off on that will actually fix some of that too. Because if you want to do transforms and everything with system drawing, you get a matrix class. So that thing you have to it gets copied over and applied, right? You don't actually just get a set of a struct. There is no such thing as far as GDI plus. Its internal representation is a class. It has a whole bunch of stuff on it. It's kind of goofy, but par for the course for GI plus performance stuff. So anyway, so yes, we might want to go out a little bit further. And the reason why I have the offset and the clip there, and not just the clip, is it's because in order to get the clip, you have to get the offset. You could ignore it on the way out, if you don't really want to use the offset, but calculating the clip requires calculating the offset.
Are you avoiding work if you call only the one out, or
yes,
is that just a convenience that most people want the offset?
The region is another class, and it's really expensive. So we can just we can look at the internal native handle to go get all the transform matrix stuff, and never create any .NET objects, finalizable .NET objects, right? These things too.
Just an implementation question here. It looks like System Drawing Graphics Unix for get context info currently throws not implemented, with a comment that the only known source of information is some blog post that doesn't exist anymore. I'm guessing this is because Mono wrote most of the Unix implementation originally, and we hadn't shared that source. Once these new things are exposed and we are basically publicly documenting what's returned, are we just going to have the same implementation for Unix?
Yeah, there's no reason not to.
Okay.
I don't know. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that the Unix one has the save state on it as well. It's like when they wrote this stuff, of course, they didn't have access to anything other than this was for internal use only, right? So, and our implementation is simply a copy of that. It started with that.
Because I was about to ask, did we need to put supported OS attributes on these? But if we're going to make the Unix one function as a result of this, then obviously not.
Yeah. There's no reason not to.
Seems fine to me.
So it seems to me then we will keep the existing get context info one as editor browsable never, probably because we wouldn't want people to use it anyway. So we want people
Yep.
to use the ones that have the outs, right? And then
Yeah,
if in
they're far more performant, and we can also change the behavior a little bit, right?
Given that it's editor browsable never, and that WinForms isn't multi-targeting, is get context info something that we would want to obsolete and just say use the new overloads instead, both for performance and for correctness reasons moving forward?
Seems reasonable. It's not a huge deal because nobody really should have been using it, but they could have because now they can see what it does. But might as well force them. Might as well encourage them down to the other APIs.
Yeah. I mean, the only problem is if they currently use the matrix, then that would suck because they don't have a super straightforward way to translate the call, right?
Well, they can add a suppression around that, but there's nothing in the matrix besides that point, so they can build the matrix on the other side if they really want to.
So it sounds like it's the identity matrix times the point.
It's just an identity matrix with just the transform pieces. What is it? I forget which part of the matrix that is. It's like the fourth and fifth float.
So if we mark the existing one obsolete, would that get a diagnostic ID?
Get what?
So the obsolete information for the other one, would that get a diagnostic ID?
Would it need one, given that it was internal use only?
I mean, the documentation doesn't say anything about internal use only. Documentation says return value is an object array where the first element contains a cumulative clip region and the second element contains the cumulative translate/transform matrix.
Oh,
the word
maybe
internal does not appear on
we did document it in core.
I guess it's hard to know whose documentation I'm looking at. I'm just looking at
There's only one. We don't have different documentation.
Yeah.
But like I mean, it was always editor browsable, at least since .NET Framework 1x. So I mean, I think the chance of somebody calling it is super low. So honestly, I'm kind of okay with just marking it as obsolete, no diagnostic ID, and then just say, use the overloads.
Well, if we just... So you'd put a message on it?
I mean...
obsolete with the...
normally I would say no because it's hard, but like in this case, the instruction is like brain that simple, right? Like you use the other ones.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's common enough that it would matter that the messages don't localize.
That's true.
So yeah, I don't think it's worth burning an ID on. I don't think we need a docs page for it. Let's just use the other one.
Yeah. I mean, if we ever wanted something else, I mean, the nice thing is with outs, we can overload this in any same import we want, so it seems pretty safe to me.
Yeah, I mean, I slightly wonder if the point should be a return, but just leave it as outs. It discourages people from calling it.
I mean, if you make it a return, then it's weird because how would you call it now?
Well, yeah, and I assume that part of why you want the out is because pointdef is a struct, and so you're doing that. It can pass the address of the stack and not actually do a struct copy. But
you can't overload based on return type.
No, but one could be if you move pointdef offset to the return value, then you would have get context info. Oh, you can't because the 0 parameter one's already taken.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep. Yeah, and we definitely want one without the region on it because that's super.
Ignore
Pricey.
everything I just said. That's okay, y'all do anyway. Yeah, I gotta laugh.
All right, so then we're happy with that.
If you've scrolled your window, then Teams froze.
It probably did because CPU. Like here's the fun thing. A quarter of my CPU right now does anti-malware. I don't know what the fuck is going on my machine, but that's just Windows for you, I guess. It's grooming itself, just in case. So I think there were some other issues that Jeremy filed, which I'm wondering whether we should look at now, even though they're not on the list, but I think we have enough time today.
Santi just marked it as ready for review. It was missed. It's 47940.
But I think that the summary on this one is the current one we're marking obsolete with a English only message, no diagnostic ID. We're adding the other two as proposed, and that's what your summary block says.
Yes, I believe so. So Jeremy, the other ones that are marked for 6, there's one. Let me actually scroll on the other windows, at least the people on the internet can see it. I guess, yeah, this is unfortunate because it's not in there. How about I open these guys?
It's 47940.
So there's this one here, and then there is, what was the other one? Oh, come on.
The one from WinForms?
Yeah, no, the other one is 39406.
Yeah, that's the other one that I just had open. So then let's do the 4338 one first. Add iDevice context overloads to control paint.
Huh?
That's the one from .NET WinForms.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's fairly straightforward.
There's a lot of APIs.
Yeah, it's adding the same overload to every one of them. So there is one already. So control paint. So there's text renderer and control paint, and these are two of the main helper classes that allow you to compose controls, right? So let you draw borders and 3D borders and buttons and grab handles and menu glyphs, all this sort of stuff. On a few of them, we already have one that takes an iDevice context instead of a graphics. And we have like text renderer, the more modern ones that we have, which that one came out later, it just takes iDevice context. This is just providing the same set of APIs that take an iDevice context instead of a graphics object. And like our other ones, these will apply. If you pass in a graphics object as your iDevice context, these will apply via the API we just saw, the transform and the clip. But that's really about all there is to it. And one other small detail is listed in there as well, because there is no alpha when it comes to GDI. Alpha is ignored, but that's what we do everywhere, where we take iDevice context in.
So the alpha doesn't get pre-multiplied or anything?
No, they're just ignored. They're dropped. So you can deal with that yourself if you want to buck the other existing pattern, but this fits into the whole thing where we have the pattern here that's new is that we added iDevice context to the paint event args, because your normal painting cycle is for a WinForms app is that you get a paint event, right? You do on paint, right? You override that, or you hook the event for paint, and you get this paint event args. And historically you just use the graphics object on it, but now that we have an iDevice context on it, we can avoid creating a graphics object to draw around it. You can just pass the paint event args in to the overloads that you were doing before, and it's a fairly straightforward translation for most things. There's slight changes in behavior if you were taking advantage of things, that you can't go there if you're trying to use transparency or things like that. But that's true for any of the iDevice context things that we have. But for normal situations when you're just drawing simple things, it's much faster to avoid creating the graphics object, which is super heavyweight. Takes a lot of native memory and does a lot of work.
And you don't expect any real callers using method name reflection on like draw locked frame, which currently doesn't have overloads?
No, I wouldn't expect that.
Right. So this is just anywhere that took a graphics aside from draw image disabled.
Which already had it.
Go ahead and make an overload that takes an iDevice context.
Yes.
I mean, I just threw it in beyond compare. Like, it seems like you literally just have an overload for every single one of them, and then we only omitted the two things, one that already exists and the other one that just doesn't make sense, right?
Yeah, the one because the one takes an image and you need a graphics
to render an
object to deal with the image. Because the image can be anything, right? It can be stuff that you can't represent directly in GDI. So we'd have to create a graphics object anyway, and use it to put the image in there.
So, I mean, I think I asked this last... Sorry, go ahead, Jeremy.
Go ahead. I was going to say, assuming that all of the parameters other than the first parameter are named identical to what they are in the existing overloads, it seems fine to me.
Yeah, beyond compare says yes. So then, my other question, I think I asked this last time, which is kind of like, are we now effectively saying iDevice context is an overload to graphics in pretty much every API? Because I think there's like a ton of APIs that tag graphics, right? Or is this everything?
For the support ones, the other ones are all just the on and event stuff, and that's you're getting the graphics embedded in an event arg. So yeah, effectively you're getting iDevice context everywhere now. Because you have iDevice context on the events, the arguments, the event args itself now, and that's the only other place you really get a graphics object. Indirectly as a property on that thing.
I mean, is your question, Emo, should there be a major sweep and find anywhere that takes the graphics and make sure there's an overload?
Yeah, I don't know about my suggestion because I think I understand what the performance concerns are, but like it seems a little bit unfortunate that we effectively create this alternate universe, right? But I guess we have done this in other places too, right? Where everything that takes a byte array now also takes a span, right? And so
I was going to say, this feels like spanification to me, of find the areas that you care about the most and then eventually get everywhere.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm doing here, as I was going in priority order as I hit things. Yeah, unfortunately, of course, the bet was that everything would be GDI plus, and and with real world, it ended up that wasn't practical.
Yeah. I mean, it is what it is, right? I mean, it seems like there's not really...
if we could go back and redo it, we would have had it support GDI directly as well, and come up with some better abstraction for it. But, like maybe have everything get device context, right?
Right, so I marked it as approved. I pasted in the APIs. You can't see it probably because Teams is being Teams today. So then we have these two covered, and then I think the next one is in the runtime repo again. That was the exposed system drawing graphics, native graphics, which is 3946.
Yeah. For anyone who's on Teams, I am trying to stream the YouTube, which is on a delay, through the Teams. Are people seeing that, and is it useful?
Yes.
Okay.
On both.
Thankfully, Emo's Teams is not painting through his streaming, so YouTube's not seeing YouTube seeing. Yeah. Anyway. Continuing on.
This one is just exposing the ability to look at the native handle and giving you the ability to construct from the native handle. We have this for icon. Icon's a little odd in the fact that it's not GDI plus. It's the one thing in system drawing that's GDI, but following the same pattern for that. This is very useful for the ability to do optimizations or interop with native code that happens to be using GDI plus in some form or another. There are optimizations that we can be doing, particularly in WinForms, where we can basically develop the pattern and then potentially evolve some of those things into full-fledged system drawing API changes around performance bottlenecks. Like it gives us the flexibility to go straight at the native API for something that doesn't have an optimal system drawing exposure for it. And there are.
We're calling everything handle here. Is that what they're called? Like, are they at H something in the native API?
They're the native API. They're like GP graphics and GP brush and stuff like that. But I went with handle because that's what icon has. It has a dot
I think handle is generally pretty standard in WinForms, I thought.
Yeah, we use handle all over WinForms, but I mean system drawing came from WinForms, but.
Okay, well, I know that a lot of WinForms is, like the H-Wind, and that's, it is a handle, but...
Yeah. And these are handles.
Okay.
Are we usually using NPDR for that, or are we using safe handles for those?
In pointer? For dot handle, it's always in pointer. So there is an obligation on your part to when you're going at the native handle to not lose your containing disposable that's going to or finalizer, the finalizable object that's going to close it. But so these are definitely advanced scenario.
Does anything in the WinForm stuff use safe handles in the public API?
I don't think so. I mean, WinForms also predates safe handle, I believe.
Yeah. It felt consistent with the area to me.
Yeah.
Just being like, you better know that this window still exists.
Yeah, and this is meant for performance and advanced scenarios. You're going to p-invoke directly into the flat API for GDI plus. Very narrow, but important for WinForms and some of the vendors too, if they're the control vendors.
And so it seems like WinForms also has an interface, IOWin32 window, that only has one property called handle. I suppose this is really truly only for Windows, right? It's not used for anything else, right?
No, and I actually internally have an iHandle because we use that to identify the things that have the dot handle property, because
I see.
In our p invokes we use that to just do a GC keep alive on the object and then do a dot handle and p invoke to be a little bit more efficient than creating a handle ref. So I may bring that forward eventually. I haven't fully thought that out.
Makes sense. Anybody any concerns with that?
I think the lifetime management is complicated, but it's following an existing complicated pattern, so I'll give it a shrug. It's WinForms.
You give us the crypto treatment. That's so unfair, Jeremy.
You reap what you sow, my man.
All right. Let me mark this. Alrighty. So then we have Jeremy's thing is done.
There's just one left.
Oh, is there? Which one is left? Oh, this one.
The 47940.
Copy link. So this is the add more performant transform APIs in system drawing?
Yes. So it's incredibly non-performant that if you want to do matrix stuff that you have to deal with multiple instances of finalizable classes. In addition to which, it's pretty typical for people to forget to actually dispose of these. Because you do a property get, you get, on you do .transform, you're getting this matrix class, right, which is a finalizable object that you need to dispose. And most people don't, so it ends up on the finalizer queue.
The property gets returning a new object each time?
Yep.
If only we had a guideline that said not to do that.
Yeah, well.
And now if only we had published it.
If only CDI Plus had actually followed that guideline. So,
indeed.
So the one semi-odd thing about this is that we would be taking a dependency on system numerics, which is in box now and has been since 3.1. Is that correct, Tanner?
Yep.
So, but that's the one thing we have that it's a direct one-to-one relationship with the internal data. So there is actually a class in GAI Plus, but in that class there is a matrix of a straightforward series of floats, and they have APIs to copy that in and out. So with these patterns here, we would never create the class, the finalizable class. If you're passing in those other things, we would use. We of course have to create the GDI Plus class, but we would never create the wrapper around it. We just get the handle, call the other pinvoke, and then call the last pinvoke to free it.
Sorry, you said
So
you have operators here.
What's that?
So you have casting operators here. Are they implicit or explicit? I assume they're all explicit.
And I think I might have forgotten to type that.
Yeah, and Eric, you use F#. How well does F# do operators? Like, do they confuse F# people? I mean, they confuse C# people, but.
I believe they are supported, but they're not implicitly usually. But I think you have to always be explicit, I think.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, F# doesn't really have implicit cast, so you generally have to explicitly cast even between primitive types.
Yeah. So even if you think the casting syntax is convenient, I think that we want a static from vector and an instance to vector as named versions of these operators.
Do we want from vector as well?
Or a constructor. I mean, constructors aren't as expensive as, like, you see the new, but new doesn't really mean new. So if you so either a constructor or a static.
So a 2 and a constructor. Yeah, I'm happy to add those. I mean, the point size and rectangle thing, or just like if we're going to take the dependency on these, people want to be able to interrupt a little easier with those three. Those three are just structs, of course, too. Well, not all of them are. They're direct mapping to the underlying stuff. So anyway.
Yeah, I mean
the graphics change and the matrix change are the ones that have the perf implications. Those are the reason that's what drove me to create this thing.
Right. Yeah, and I assume you have a typo in matrix that you can set matrix elements, since elements is get only, or is that because matrix 3x2 is a read-only struct?
Where did I do this?
At the bottom of what's on Emo's screen, so at the bottom of what I'm sharing via Teams.
The float elements?
Yeah, so there's float array elements, which is get only, and then there's matrix elements, which is get set.
Yeah, I don't know why they didn't put a setter on it to begin with. They very well could have, because you can set it from the float array. So I have no idea why they didn't do it.
Okay.
I presume it was just an oversight, but I don't know. I wasn't going to add one for that because I don't want to encourage people to use that anyway. That's like expensive. I mean, to go with freight anyway.
For matrix in particular, should there also be here a get elements span? Basically the same method that you just internally added, but for users who want to just get the elements into a span, either because they've got their own custom matrix type or they just don't want to use matrix 3x2.
Good.
Because otherwise they're just going to end up calling matrix elements and then get span, which is a bit of unnecessary overhead.
Or they can, play unsafe. Cast it to the other thing. If we weren't able to take the dependency, I would have had this thing be a span, but like it's a little bit more awkward to write those. It doesn't mean that we can't. I just didn't put it on there. If we think we want it, that's fine.
I mean, I'd want to hear about use cases before we added it, assuming we haven't been spanifying other data access in system drawing.
We spanified all of the vector and matrix types, and so matrix in particular, Jeremy just put up a PR for two of the other properties, for example, that are exposed on matrix are offset X and offset Y. And prior to Jeremy's change, they were calling elements get and then accessing index 5. And so for every single property access, you would be allocating. So it allocated the short-term 6-element array. It allocated a native memory via Marshall alloc H global. It copied the memory. It freed the native one, and then the offset X would return element 5, which puts the allocated array immediately up for freeing. And so part of his PR fix was to fix that by ensuring we only have one array allocation, but also exposing an internal method that allocates directly to a span. That way we could, for offset X and Y, avoid the allocation. This would be just making that new method that we've got internal now public, just because it is immensely useful for cases like that.
Right, just like it's are people outside the library really using the elements, and when they are using the elements, would they rather have the structure of the matrix, or do they actually want it as the flat data? And I know that some people who are using matrix want the flat data, but do the people who are using graphics want the matrix or the flat data? And if they don't want the flat data, then I don't see a reason to add it. I mean, it doesn't super hurt. It's just, it's easier to add things later than it is to take things away. So that's really I'd want to see someone who wanted to use it before we said like, oh, let's just add a get elements, an public int get elements span of float, which returns 6. Yeah.
So I just updated the API spec based on what we said earlier. So just want to get back to the constructors and the conversion method for a second. So I added those. I assume that looks good to people. The conversion
small
method
typo there with the rectangle. It's vector 4 from 2 vector.
Sorry, yes. And are we okay with calling it 2 vector, or should we call it 2 vector 2, 2 vector 4 respectively, just to be explicit? But I guess you would never have other versions of that, right?
Yeah, I like to vector better than to vector in.
Yep.
Okay.
Me too.
And then, so it seems like we're proposing another method for the spanning thingy, or did we decide not to?
Go ahead, Tanner.
I was going to say, just from the perspective of 2-vector versus 2-vector n, we should likely explicitly use vector 2 because, so there's two reasons here. One, we're going to be exposing the new generic vector 2, 3, and 4, which support float and double. And two, we also have vector of t, which is where we commonly use 2-vector to mean today. We've got vector 128, vector 64, and vector 256. And basically everywhere except for vector of t, we explicitly annotate the number of elements or the number of bits.
Okay.
If we have the generics coming, that makes sense to me too.
Alright, so then I just renamed them, and then, so for the span thing, on the matrix tab, are we adding something or not?
It sounds like Jeremy indicated it'd be better to wait, and that's fine with me since we can still have the internal method. I didn't have a strong preference, and I don't know if Santi does.
Yeah, really my comment is just if anyone can justify it as a outside this library user scenario, then sure, but if it's just a, well, maybe someone might one day, then they can go through the matrix 3x2 property in the meantime.
Yep, seems reasonable to me.
I agree with that. I don't have a strong preference either.
The other Jeremy doesn't have a strong preference either.
Alright, then let's do it as it's proposed here, and then we can add more stuff later.
Ship it.
Alright.
No, it's still system drawing.
Alright, so I think now we have Jeremy's ones all covered, I believe.
I'm all done. Yep.
And now we're down to, so WinForms we do tomorrow, and then I think now we have the link ones from Eric, I believe.
Yep.
Okay. Thanks all.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Hey, so this is the, I promised the final API proposal for Link, again, coming from the community.
The final one?
So
that's the last word here. The last API we had to Link, okay.
Well, for this meeting at least. Again, this is like a very simple proposal. This method exists in other Link libraries as well. I believe the posters have mentioned Rust, and I've also seen this in Sharp too. And the idea is basically that given an input enumerable and a predicate on the elements, basically return a tuple that contains, on one hand, the subset of elements that satisfy the predicate, and on the other hand, the subset of elements that do not satisfy the predicate. So essentially, you're looking at a variation of toLookup. If you scroll down a bit, you might see like the actual API shape.
So I have scrolled, it's just probably delayed on YouTube.
Yeah, I see. So basically, it returns a couple of fully materialized collections, which is why the return type is read-only list instead of enumerable. And this is because it's basically to emphasize that this is not a deferred calculation. It will actually run the enumeration and populate the two collections immediately. And also because of that fact, we won't be exposing an iQueryable overload for that particular method.
So, two questions.
Since iQueryable is enumerable, if I recall correctly, that means it will show up, but it's a drain and just drops you out of queryable land, right?
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
Since these are new, newly created read-only lists, right? Why isn't it just iList, and then I can modify it if I want to?
I mean, no real reason. I suppose echoing how ToLookup works or how GroupBy works, you typically, if I'm not mistaken, you cannot really modify these outputs.
I let ToLookup just returned a writable dictionary of T1, T2.
So there is ToDictionary which does do that, but ToLookup returns, I believe, an interface called iLookup, which is very simple and cannot really be modified. I don't have any strong opinion in terms of whether it should be iList or not. Frankly, iRead-only list was picked almost arbitrarily, and it was primarily intended to, clearly communicate the fact that, this is not a deferred computation because it cannot be one.
Yeah, I mean, we do have a principle which is basically parameters should accept the weakest type they need, and return type should be the strongest type you have. So if this is going to be implemented as returning two different instances of list of T, we should just be honest in the return type and let people own the object when it's returned. So not iList, not iRead-only list, just list.
Yeah, I was about to say, like, if you want people to be able to modify, then list makes sense. If you just want to persist it, I would just return them as arrays, which, quite frankly, is probably also okay.
Well, an array is going to be weird because you're going to have to use a list as the intermediate storage because you don't know how big it's going to get, especially if it's a non-countable enumerable. And then why are we making a copy? Just return them the list.
Fair enough. Yeah, I buy that.
Yeah, list is simple.
Does anyone have opinions on the names? I feel like unsatisfied I might like better than falsified, because falsified feels weird. Yeah, that's how strong my feelings are. Feels weird.
I mean, you could say selected and unselected.
Matched and unmatched.
Matched and unmatched,
Yeah,
I think, is actually pretty good, yeah.
You use matched and unmatched in the sample code above.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like matched, unmatched. The other one reads like a dissertation. This one reads like an English novel.
Right. Well, because to me, falsified is like a falsified claim of you asserted something and someone disproved it.
Yeah, I mean, matched and unmatched sounds good to me. Like they are pretty self-explanatory in terms of what each of them means. So yeah. I guess I should mention that there are pretty strong counter-arguments against incorporating this, and the primary counter-argument is that ToLookup can be used very effectively to achieve the exact same goal. But the only issue with that is, theoretical performance concerns, because there is a hash table involved in the building of the two results. So basically, I think somebody actually added an example describing how this could be done with ToLookup if people are interested. But in practice, I don't think it would provide significantly more value.
I mean,
Eric, does this evaluate the source twice, or does it memoize the source first?
So it will evaluate the source only once, and it will do so eagerly as soon as you call the method. So this is not a deferred execution.
Okay. Oh, it's returning a list. I see.
Yeah, so I mean, I think as I said this last time, to me the value of the method doesn't seem very high because you can achieve this with ToLookup or probably also GroupBy if you wanted to. But I mean, what this one is different here in the sense that it gives you back mutable objects, which is probably more useful than what group by or to lookup would do. So I think it adds some value, and it's probably, as you said, also more efficient. So if you really need the scenario, I can buy what you want as API.
Yeah, it's also probably also just a little bit more straightforward.
Yeah.
Like the group by is not the easiest thing in the world to work with. It does magic like group by in SQL, but that doesn't mean it's friendly to work with. So I think it's a reasonable utility function.
Is the outputs guaranteed to be in the same order as the input? Like,
yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it should be.
Same relative order.
Right, yeah. Yeah. If something came before, if two things were matched, and one came before the other in the source, it'll come before the source.
Yeah.
Or
Assuming
before
that
the
you're,
other one.
assuming
Yeah,
that
it
your
should
source
be
was
pretty
itself
easy to guarantee that.
Yeah, it seems hard to not guarantee that.
Yeah, because there was a
to
sample
look up
implementation there.
So one other, I know you're approving, but just usually when we have APIs, link APIs that fully materialize something, we call them to something to make it obvious in the naming that it actually is materializing this as opposed to just iterating it. Should we be considering that there? Because like just looking at this naively, if I just saw a partition method, it wouldn't necessarily occur to me that, oh, this is going to materialize a bunch of stuff.
But you can't, the fact that it's returning a tuple of lists means you can't really have used it in an inline expression and had a different expectation.
Yeah, I think once I looked at it and I was like, oh, it's returning lists, so it must be materializing these things. I'm just saying that, like, typically for things like this, we pick a name that makes it obvious that we are actually materializing stuff. Like to lookup, for example, right?
I mean, I would normally agree, but I think the reason we do this is because if you chain them, you don't realize that you're inefficient, if that makes sense. But if you, like, for example, if you have a two array somewhere, because the array also is IEnumable, like you just waste efficiency, right? Versus in this case, you can't really chain this guy because it gives you back a non-IEnumable type, right? So you would, like, even if you didn't know it, like your code would make that fairly obvious because, I mean, the very next thing you would have to do after partitioning it is either indexing into it, not indexing, property, accessing into it or deconstructing it, right? That's the only thing you can do with this method, right? So I think the call side will make that obvious. You can't really mess that up.
If you're deconstructing with var, then yeah, it could look like maybe you're getting two unwalked enumerables, but if we called it like to partition, then that really means that we need to make a partition type to return, because that's usually what to blank means. Like all the things on link that are system enumerable that are manifesting are always saying I'm returning a thing of this type, or at least this interface. And this one is like I'm verbing.
Usually when I have a collection and I hear the word partitioning, I would think that it involves maybe running over it in parallel. I know we use that language elsewhere, I think in like parallel 4 or something like that. Is there a less ambiguous name we can think of for this?
Unzip.
Partition certainly doesn't imply parallel to me, but it could just be lacking the to me, it's just, disk part, move the slider. What's on the left and what's on the right.
Maybe it's just me. If it's just me, then we can keep it as partition.
No, I agree. I kind of agree. I mean, when I think partition, the combination of partitioning along with materialization is kind of weird to me. Like when I think partition, I would think of like iterating and not necessarily materializing as I go, but making some decision as I go and doing something different with those things.
I mean, we could call it evaluate filter. So it's like it's doing things, it's evaluating.
Call it match.
Actually, match is not bad.
Does that solve your concern of does it feel like it's active versus lazy?
Maybe.
Okay.
I don't have a strong opinion on it.
I mean, match returning a tuple of matched and unmatched seems fair.
I like that.
Yeah, I can live with match.
All right, I have to jump to a different meeting. I might return. Sorry that the YouTube restream is disappearing.
All right, so then let me update this guy here. Right, so happy with that then? I can also try sharing again, maybe now it works.
Yeah, looks good to me.
Are you sharing your screen, Emo? I don't see anything.
I'm using the
apparently
YouTube
I
stream.
can't.
Oh, okay.
Just share it in the chat.
Yeah, I can't share anymore. I don't know. Teams is not able to share. All right, so then let's move to the next one, which I believe is 45148 is IPv6 unique local address.
Sorry, could you repeat that?
So it is issue number 45148, and it's the add is IPv6 unique local address. That's the
So
issue.
this is we have a couple properties like this on IP address already. Notably, is IPv6 site local. This is just another flag like that. Certain IPv6 addresses are certain kind of special addresses, either site local, unique local, that have certain special semantics associated with them, and are a reserved range of addresses. So the proposal here is just to add I believe this one was kind of added after the fact, after originally IPv6 was defined, which is why we didn't do it in the first place. But the proposal here is just to add another bool.
Yeah, I mean, it seems pretty straightforward to me. Any objections? Don't hear any, so either the stream ended or everybody agrees. Alright, then let's go to the next one. This would be 469888, which is the Microsoft Extensions Configuration App Binding, which I think is probably Miriam. Miriam on the call? Doesn't seem like it. Can anybody hear me actually? I see. It looks like nobody can hear me. That might be a problem. Hold on.